Due the current events that transpired this week, I think we felt that we needed to discuss this topic. If that's and I believe there is an interest from most of our customers to discuss it. So with me to the here in the room, I have with me Rikard Burman.
Good morning.
Yeah, say hi. Lead architect in cybersecurity. Also from across the pond, we have with us Anders Urban and Jason Perno from the incident response team. Say hi, guys.
Morning. Morning.
Right. So today's agenda will be focused on the threat actor known as Akira and what they do and so forth, and how can we protect ourselves not only from this group but also from other threat actors, along with some specific services that we feel are relevant in this day and age. So, right, let's get started. Who is Akira, quite frankly? So, Jason, Anders, who is Akira Group?
Yeah, thank you. I'll be starting off and then handing over to Anders in a minute. So Akira has been making a lot of headways over the last year. I think it started back in March of 2023, and it really kind of hit the peak somewhere around June or July, when we saw a lot of supply chain attacks that they were basically taking advantage of. The Akira Group, they're basically a fast-growing, financially motivated ransomware group, and they are using what's known as ransomware as a service. And typically what they do, their whole business model is to exfiltrate data and then try to extort money from companies. Typically, these companies are small to mid-sized companies, anywhere between 1 to 200 people, although we've seen larger companies as well, but typically they go for the small to medium-sized companies. And there has been some blockchain analysis that has actually shown that these companies the Akira is affiliated with former now defunct Conti ransomware gang. And you'll see that there is some connection because of these blockchain analysis that they've done that have seen as many as, I think, $600,000 US has been transferred to accounts that are known to be associated with the Conti ransomware group. So a lot of times these ransomware gangs, they'll switch hats and they'll break down and they'll start new groups. Another thing that should be known is that, well, this is as of yesterday, I actually went on the dark web to check the site, and there are at least 195 compromises that are published on their leak site. And those are the ones that they've published, and they probably have a lot more victims. One more thing I'd like to say is that Avast, the security antivirus company, supposedly came out with a decryption key, and it did work initially. But in July, I think the Akira Group realized the mistakes that they had made, and they had fixed that, and now that decryption key no longer works. If you were hoping to use that decryption key, it's no good at this point. So yeah, that's next slide. Just get right to it. So a couple of statistics. Basically, as of 2022, we were seeing ransomware accounting for 1/5 of all security incidents. But this has increased in 2023 to now more than 1/3 of security incidents are ransomware cases. And a fun fact is that at least nearly half of all ransomware detonation occurs over the weekend between Friday and Sunday, or during the holidays when they know that less people are available to respond. So keep that in mind. In terms of the dwell time, from the time that they initially access the environment to the time that they deploy the ransomware, statistically speaking, it's anywhere between 1 to 3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks. So it's important to note that if you're going to have backups, for example, that they go back at least a month at the bare minimum for an attack scenario like this. Typically what happens is, and we've seen this now with many cases, it's always the same thing. They initially gain access, and the way that they do that, 50% of the time is with RDP. And if they're not using RDP, it's phishing emails, and we've seen people get phished and Cobalt Strike being deployed under phishing emails. Sometimes they use valid credentials. We've seen stolen credentials from legitimate companies that are partnering up with a business, and because they didn't have multi-factor authentication, then they ended up using those valid credentials to log in, and then they got into the network that way. So typically they'll get that initial access, and then from there they'll typically run a scanning tool to try to get a lay of the land and see what's in the infrastructure. And then once they get that, then they'll do some credential harvesting. Typically we'll see them try to get onto the domain controllers and dump all the credentials, and then they have basically the keys to the kingdom. Once they get that, then they're going to start, you'll usually see a lot of lateral movement happening around the network. They're trying to see what they can take that's of value, and then eventually what they'll do is they'll get to the file share or something like that. And then we'll see the use of some sort of data exfiltration tools, zipping up of files, syncing to different cloud services and so on. And then usually within 1 to 2 days of actually taking the information, then they deploy the ransomware. It's almost always exactly that same pattern every single time. And you can guarantee that if you've been hit by Akira, that they've likely stolen your data. Otherwise, they wouldn't have deployed the ransomware. So I'm going to switch over to Anas right now, and he's going to talk a little bit about why it's important to investigate these things. So if you can just move to the next slide.
I actually have just one question. Have we seen where they're actually deploying ransomware more quickly than before? They're not waiting as long time as they've done before when they get access.
Yeah, and that's a good question, because it depends on the environment. And what we've seen is that the larger companies that have many different servers, and it takes time for them to get a lay of the land and to move around and escalate privileges and all that. But in other cases, we've seen, for example, companies only had 3 servers or 4 servers and a hypervisor, and they can very quickly find everything. And we've seen it happen within 1 or 2 days. So it has been faster. And now we're seeing even patterns where they're not even encrypting anything. They're just stealing the data and then just saying that we have your data, and if you don't want it released publicly, then you have to pay us. So
Right.
To summarize that a bit, we seen between the start of June, it was almost a month in the environment, and the last couple of cases we had at the end of 2023, we were down to a few days. So that's the time span more or less.
Yeah. And also on the ransomware statistics note, I wanted to mention, because in the yesterday, I think the Sweden moved closer to a membership in NATO. So, and a colleague of mine mentioned that the radar group has released numbers based on when Finland joined NATO recently, where of course the number of cyber attacks increased, I think, about 40%. But when we talk about ransomware, the increase were actually fourfold, meaning 400% increase in ransomware attacks when Finland joined NATO. I mean, Denmark is already a member of NATO, and now Finland and Sweden to be, so we can probably expect an increase in ransomware in the coming year. And I hope you agree with me, Anderson and Jason.
We do totally, and it's not a secret that I worked with NATO for quite a few years, and also the EU PESCO teams. And the picture you're drawing is absolutely correct.
Yeah, I would like to add also that through our negotiators that we've partnered with, we have learned also that this is a Russian group that we're dealing with as well. So it should be noted, and I didn't state that before, but yes.
Yeah. Okay, so why should we pay for an investigation then?
That's a very good question. And to answer that, we had quite a lot of these major cyber incidents being ransomware cases with Akira since June 2023. And in every single case, obviously, for the customers, it's a question of why should we pay for the investigation? What benefits does this actually give us? Why don't we just restore, rebuild, and then get up and running again? But in the top 4 topics on this, I'm just going to address those. But all in all, I want to say, obviously, we have a lot more information on this, and we have a lot of knowledge. We can't express it all in half an hour, but please ask questions and try to follow up on those. So point number 1, what was the entry point? Knowing the entry point, was it a supply chain attack? Was it a phishing email? How did they actually get inside the system will make you in a position where you can actually mitigate, patch, and make sure it doesn't happen again, at least not in the same way. So knowing the entry point is absolutely crucial to make sure you secure your environment and don't get hit by the same group or another similar group in the same way again. So that's the first one. The second one, when did it initially, the initial compromise first occur? To know the time of the first initial compromise actually puts you in a position where you can find a safe point to restore from, right? It doesn't do the company any good if you start restoring or rebuilding and using data from before the first point of entry, because then you might have some kind of persistence in the system and they'll own your system even though you restore or rebuild. So knowing that, when did they actually initially get access to your system is totally crucial to get your company up and running safely again, obviously. Number 3 on the board, obviously, Akira, we have seen in many of these major cyber incidents we had with them, we have seen them leaving persistence in the system. They made backdoors so that if companies tried to just restore or rebuild without going into negotiation or paying anything, they had a backdoor and an access into the system. So this is why knowing number 2 and number 3 is crucial, right? To get up and running again and make sure that the point you restore from is before the initial entry point, so you don't have any persistent mechanisms in your system in the data that you restore from. Hashtag number 4, point number 4 on the board, what data was exfiltrated? See, every single time we go into these cases, obviously it's crucial to know what kind of data was exfiltrated. It could be GDPR data, it could be company critical or sensitive data. So there's a lot of issues to take into consideration. You might go into lawsuits afterwards if this data is leaked. You might lose your customers. You might lose the integrity of other companies you're working together with. So there's a lot of things to take into account when you talk about what kind of data was actually exfiltrated. And it can have a big effect on the company afterwards, right? So that is crucial for us as well to kind of define what kind of data was exfiltrated, so the companies, the customers can take the right decisions on that note. Yeah, so that's the 4 main points. Obviously, there's more points than this, but that's it for this slide. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so we're going to get a little bit technical for a second. So for the non-technically minded, just bear with me for a second. This is a very important slide for those who actually are working with a SOC and they want to set up some monitoring or they want to do some investigating themselves. This has been compiled from, as you can see, there's an article called Arctic Wolf. They did actually a very good job about this Conti/Akira relationship. And they've also listed a bunch of tools, tactics, and procedures that are used by Akira. And I've just enriched it with the information that we've also found in our own cases. And of course, you know, tools, tactics, and procedures change over time, but you just have to be aware that they are using, for the most part, a combination of these tools to accomplish during each step of this attack chain. They'll gain initial access using either RDP or phishing emails. We had, spoken about that. There's also the supply chain angle, which unfortunately we can't mention specific companies, but we can say that it's well known that Cisco has some vulnerabilities in their ASA firewall as well as in their VPN solution, AnyConnect, that should be patched. And of course, they're using a couple of scanning tools, credential harvesting tools like Mimikatz to dump credentials. And then they have the typical execution paths using PowerShell, Windows command, and so on, and tunneling that to establish backdoor persistence. You know, they're using tunneling software like ngrok, Cobalt Strike, and things like that. And then we typically see them moving around laterally using either RDP, pass the hash, PSExec is used a lot, and then the data exfiltration tools. So you can set up a number of alerts to trigger on these IOCs, indicators of compromise. And then, of course, you're going to have access to these slides, so you don't have to worry about taking screenshots. But we're running out of time here, so I'm just going to move back to Anas, and he's going to talk a little bit about negotiation and under what conditions we should or should not negotiate with the ransom.
Thank you, Jason. So in every case, you know, it's always, first of all, a moral issue. Don't negotiate with terrorists. That's kind of a common impression. And I feel the same way. If it can be avoided, don't negotiate with these kind of guys. But in many cases, it's just necessary. And let's dig a bit into that because I think it's a big point to take into consideration when you have these ransomware cases. When it's not necessary to negotiate is when you have confirmed technically in a forensic investigation that you haven't lost any kind of critical, sensitive, or GDPR data. Let's just say you lost production data, which is doesn't have any value to the company the day after anyway. And you can more or less say, well, the data that this group might have exfiltrated from us doesn't have any value anymore, so we don't really care. And on the other hand, of course, you need to have a backup that is good enough to kind of restore from a point before the first entry and get your systems up and running again. So if those two factors are into place, you can say, okay, we don't really care. We don't need to negotiate with the ransomware group. But when should you consider to negotiate? See, in every single case we've been working on with Akira, with Gladbasta, with any other ransomware group, they don't release the ransomware node before they actually have exfiltrated sensitive data. So in every single case, that has been the way they worked. So when that has been confirmed that you have actually lost sensitive or critical or GDPR data, obviously they have your data, and normally in the ransomware node it says from Akira 10 days, and we'll start releasing your files if you haven't gone into any kind of negotiation with us. And they will 10 days after they will do test leaks of your documents, and the process is kind of going. So every time this is the case, you should bring negotiators in. At least to stall the process, to prolong the time you have to kind of rebuild or restore your system and be safe, and also to avoid the group leaking your data, and also negotiate the price down for not leaking the data. See if you can restore. You can actually maybe reduce the price you need to pay because you can restore on your own. Otherwise, you'll need a decryption key from Akira. They'll send you, if you go into negotiation, they'll send you a decryption key. They'll send you a description of what documents did they take, how do you get up and running again, and then even do IT support and kind of support you in getting your company up and running again. So those are all the effects you'll actually get of going into negotiations with these kind of groups, which in almost every single case has been a positive way to go. They'll even send you a confirmation that your data has been erased on their side after a negotiation, and we haven't seen any case where they then later go and release anything anyway. So the last point on this one, hiring professionals. In cases like this, I would highly recommend that you never go into any kind of negotiation with these groups yourself, but get some professional negotiators in early in the process to negotiate with the ransomware groups, because they know the groups, they know how to negotiate, know how to stall the time, get the price down, know exactly what to say, and that's just skills that not everybody has. Normally, we use the company called Delta Crisis, which we've done quite a lot of cases with, and have a good communication platform with. So we kind of share intelligence and information about these groups with that company. Yeah. So that was negotiation. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Anders. So, but how do we avoid getting into this situation? How do we protect our environment?
Well, we can always start with the number one. 1A equals MFA. That's the first primary thing to start with. Because right now, they're not really hacking into stuff, they're just signing in. And if we don't protect our sign-ins with any type of multi-factor, passwordless, or YubiKeys, or FIDO2 keys from other providers, we don't actually have any protection without just our password.
Right.
And our password is always the first thing to be leaked. So always start with multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, and this is actually a part of the answer to one of the questions I can see in the chat, to which I don't want to mention anything, but MFA was actually not implemented in the recent incident, if you will, that took place here in Sweden.
In a lot of incidents, multi-factor is the key point that hasn't been enabled on all accounts, because every account needs to have multi-factor enabled in some way, some type of account protection, because it starts with an account.
Yeah.
But is MFA everything?
No, I don't think so. Even though it's very good, I think we have a lot to discuss.
A lot of us have EDR and XDR solutions up and running, but is someone actually monitoring and taking action on the alerts that are being sent out from these products?
Right.
Because just because they're there, they protect you from a lot of things, but someone needs to take action and actually monitor the alerts. A big part is also vulnerability patching. If there's no patch for vulnerability, at least try to mitigate it as far as possible until a patch has been released. Maybe even taking that service offline for now until it can be resolved. And this is also connected to all the public available service like VPN, RDP, Citrix, and every type of solution where you publish something externally. Yeah. Make sure that they are always patched and up to date. Don't run any end-of-life products being published on the internet. It's not a good idea. Password hygiene is also something we always say, use MFA, but some solutions, some applications can't use multi-factor. If they can't use multi-factor, you need to have a good password hygiene. How many digits, how many, how long should a password be?
Yeah.
This is something you need to take into consideration, actually deploying in on all systems, and actually the providers of applications needs to be aware and also be made aware of actually having the possibility to actually have your own password hygiene applicable on your applications. Don't just let the providers be the ones setting the rules. Least privilege access. Everyone doesn't need to be an administrator, at least not a domain administrator or a global administrator. Make sure that they have the least privileged access. And this is where we can leverage things like privileged identity management. Maybe just for a limited amount of time, you're able to be an admin. Make sure to train your employees. Security awareness training is actually a big part of making everyone aware. And also the board training is really important today to have them aware of a cyber incident and how should they handle it. Do we have hard copies on who to call? Because if our systems are down, Do we have contact information? Is it just published on our interweb? And if the interweb isn't accessible, how do we know who to call? What are our procedures? Are there hard copies somewhere that we can go to actually be able to read them even during a cyber incident? And the last line of defense, when everything else fails, not if, but when everything else fails, make sure that your backups are secure. Because this is the last line of defense. When everything else fails, you need to be able to restore your things, all your servers, your application, your data. So the backup is one of the things you need to secure the most, making sure that it's not accessible with the same accounts.
Yeah, and right. And this is, of course, applicable to each and every company, but also the suppliers, the vendors, the partners you're leveraging. So to avoid a supply chain attack of sorts that we have seen in recent years. So yeah, very important.
But if we don't have the possibility to do all this ourselves, what should we do? Where should we start?
Well, I would say the first order of business is a SOC, because otherwise, even though we deploy all these tools, these security tools, someone needs to look at it, someone needs to act, identify, detect, and of course respond to incidents. And these words are actually not our words. These words are from the latest Black Hat event. And it's actually quite interesting. It's a blueprint for at least our SOC in Sweden, meaning that when we built our SOC, we focused on a modern SOC with proactive measures and automation and these kinds of things, because we knew that this is the future, because we can't rely on legacy SOCs anymore. So with that being said, some statistics from 2023, at least from our side, the SOC handled more than 6,500 high severity incidents around the clock. Out of these, around 1,000 of these incidents were actually true positive as opposed to false positive, benign, and so forth. But the interesting figure is we had no major cyber incidents or breaches or ransomware to our customers. So that's good. That's really good. Yeah, and it's basically describes the need for a SOC in your environment.
But the only SOC that we provide, do we have any new cool services?
We of course do. We have because we need to test our environment as well. So what do you say, Anders and Jason, about the rent a hacker for a day? Would that be something useful for our customers?
Obviously, because, knowing their modus, the way of working and the ways they usually access the systems, rent a hacker for a day and test your systems and see if it's even possible. I mean, and patch up whatever vulnerabilities you might have is totally crucial.
And I would like to add that typically the ransomware groups like to go for the low-hanging fruit, and it's a lot easier than companies, frighteningly easier than a lot of companies are willing to admit when they take a look at themselves internally. And renting a hacker for a day, they'll probably find that low-hanging fruit very quickly and can give some valuable tips on how to harden your systems to just take care of the bare minimum.
Yeah, excellent. And another thing that worth mentioning is that more and more infrastructure are placed in the Azure. So we also have this service where we perform an Azure health check. Or what's involved in this service, Rikard?
We actually take a check, is everything configured correctly? How many external facing IP addresses? Are there any public endpoints that are published for the internet and servers and so on? So you make a checkpoint of all the subscriptions in the same tenant.
Right. Sounds good. Well, and we also have some upcoming events. The Cybersecurity and AI Roadshow taking place in Stockholm, Gothenburg, Malmö, and Copenhagen. I don't know if we've sent out invites yet, but
keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah, good. So with that being said, I'm sorry we're running over our time a bit, but can we have one question related to the incident in Sweden here recently. Do you have, Anders or Jason, do you have some information how that happened? I know that perhaps we can't say exactly, but at least give us a best guess. And also related to information that has been released regarding that incident.
You want to take this one? Okay. Well, I think, you know, a lot of it has already been addressed in terms of what we've seen in previous cases, that the multi-factor authentication is always the number one thing, the common element in how they end up getting in. So that has to be implemented, and not only internally in your environment, but applied to your partners, because we're seeing a lot of these what you call supply chain attacks from partnerships. And as secure as your environment is, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you have to keep that in mind. And the second thing is that there are well-known published vulnerabilities, as I had mentioned earlier, specifically with Cisco ASA and with the Cisco AnyConnect. And Akira is known to be exploiting these vulnerabilities. And so if it's not coming from the supply chain, it's coming from these, at least from what we've seen to Cisco, and we've also, again, seen with the phishing campaigns. Those are the main attack vectors. So you have to make sure that you have the multi-factor authentication in place. You have a really good security practices based around your email system. And that, as you have already mentioned, that there's actually somebody monitoring these alerts, because what we're finding is that we have seen that the alerts were coming in a few days prior and nobody was looking at them. Nobody was responding. So very good advice that you have a SOC, that you have your own security, at least even one person sitting there on a daily basis, looking at what's coming in your CM.
And also, you know, a lot of times we talk about multi-factor authentication, and most companies are on top of that. But when it comes to the suppliers, they're not. A lot of suppliers have a leg inside the system. Without multi-factor authentication, then you're owned anyway. So controlling the access of your suppliers, maybe even have accounts that you can open when suppliers need to be in your system and close it again. That might be a way to go. So the more strict you are on policies on allowing outside companies access to your systems, the better it is, right?
Yeah. So, and finally, we also have a question regarding what is known as phishing resistant authentication, leveraging the FIDO2 framework with YubiKeys and whatnot. So, and there are some questions, because if they break, you can't get in.
No. So you always need to have two FIDO2 keys,
right,
for the same sign-in. Because if one breaks and you don't have any other way to get into that account, you're locked out forever.
Yeah, and the follow-up question, meaning could we have certificate-based authentication instead, leveraging the certificate on the TPM chips and whatnot? So
yes, you can. But it also depends on where is this service applied, and do every service supply you with the possibility to have certificate-based sign-in.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also the factor that a certificate stored in a TPM is also a physical device.
Yeah.
So it's basically that can break as well. So yeah. I can't see any more questions in the chat. Let me know if I missed anything. But other than that, thank you guys for attending this webinar, and hope to see you in the coming Cybersecurity and AI Roadshow. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call the numbers on the screen, as well as if you're under attack, there is a phone number here where you can call. So
take a hard copy of that phone number and put it in your wallet, so you always know who to call.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. See you guys.
See you.
See you.